Hello. Welcome.
Hey, y'all.
Hey, Miss Cassie.
Hi, Mix Cassie. Mix Cassie, which organization are you with? And why are you here today? And others. We've got more people on. Come on, y'all. Welcome into the room.
Welcome.
Yes. Welcome. Hello. Talk to us in that chat, y'all.
Yeah, let's see who's in here with us today. I'm excited to connect.
Yes. Ah, nice. Hey, Emily.
Hey, Emily.
Oh, yes.
All right. Jack, should we get started? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Keep coming. Hi, Alicia. Yes. All right. Welcome. Even though we're getting started, keep those introductions coming so we know who's here, why you're here, where you are. It looks like we have people from all over, and we're super, super excited. Some friends are excited about that. Well, welcome to Embracing Equity's webinar series, Real Talk, Real Action. And we're really excited and thankful that you have done the first action of joining us in this space today. So we're going to introduce ourselves to you. I'm Dr. Nicole Noel Evans. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I serve as the Senior Director of Leadership at Embracing Equity. And so happy to be here with my partner in collaboration, Carly. I'll pass it to Carly to introduce themselves.
Hey, everybody. So good to be in this space with you. Hey, Regina. We're so excited to be here. I'm Carly. My pronouns are both she and they. I use them interchangeably. And I'm Embracing Equity Senior Director of Learning, and real pumped to be here with you, Dr. Evans.
Yes, same. All right. So, thinking about this topic, again, thanks to Carly for joining me in this conversation today. Carly and I are both from St. Louis, and so we have lots of conversations about a lot of things. But when I'm thinking about this particular topic on how to respond to microaggressions, it's a question that we get all the time from folks that we're working with. There's a lot to unpack here. And so today we're going to talk about first how to identify microaggressions and the messages that they're really sending and how to interrupt them with micro interventions. So we're going to ask you all a question. We come on, y'all. We need action. We need y'all to get in here and drop some things in the chat. So here's the question. Without overthinking it, what's the first word or phrase that comes to mind when you hear the term microaggression? Drop that in the chat for us. What comes to mind when you hear that term? What comes to mind? Drop in the chat for us, y'all.
Yeah.
Cutting. Ooh, thank you, Emily. Yes.
Yeah, we sometimes refer to it as death by 1,000 cuts, right? It's these daily indignities that are happening over and over on a small scale, but the impact is huge.
Yes. racist, ignorant. Yes. Keep them coming, y'all. Yes. Those are things that come to mind. Yes.
Mhm.
Prejudice. Yes. Yes. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. Yes. What else comes to mind? Just when you hear that term, what comes up for you? What comes up for you? Keep it coming. Keep it coming in the chat. Keep it coming. Keep it coming.
Unsafe, duplicitous, and dangerous. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
What word's coming up for me, Doc, is unconscious. So many times microaggressions can be done without a person realizing that they're perpetuating them.
Yes. I agree. And we're going to talk about that and get into that a little bit more too. Yeah. I think, the phrase that comes to mind for me that I'm thinking about based upon what you just said.
Yeah.
What comes to mind for me is backhanded compliment.
Ooh, yeah.
That comes to mind. Like, some people really believe that they're giving a compliment, and
Mhm.
it's really not that. When we hear things like, "Oh, you are so articulate," right? In a shocking way, right? That's sort of that backhanded compliment. It sounds like a compliment, but when you really unpack it, it really is truly a microaggression. Keep coming. Yeah, thank you, Melanie. Ignorance. Yes, keep them coming, y'all. We got over 20 people in this StreamYard with us in this webinar. But come on, give us more. We want this to be really interactive with you all and us. So although Carly and I are both having the conversation, y'all are in it with us. You're in it with us. Yes. Deflection and manipulation. Ooh, that's
Lack of
heavy.
trust.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Ooh, Sammy, lack of trust. Yes. Yes. All right. Well, as you all are dropping those, I'm gonna just start, Carly. We talked about, we define it in so many ways. We define it with death by 1,000 cuts. So let's not start by assuming that everyone really knows what microaggressions are. So help us out, Carly. Let's start off with, what are microaggressions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want us to start back first with understanding what social identities are, actually. And
Yeah.
so, social identities, we are all made up of a myriad of social identities. Some of these identities are marginalized and some
Yeah.
of them are dominant. Each of us are born into or develop them, and they make up characteristics like our race, ethnicity, culture, religion, language, economic class, sexual orientation, family structure, abilities. And these identities connect us to larger groups beyond just our families. So when we're thinking about microaggressions, these are going to be microaggressions that are done against those marginalized identities. So microaggressions, Daryl Wing Sue, he coined, or he didn't coin this, but he did elaborate on the research about microaggressions, and he defines them as brief and commonplace daily verbal and behavioral interpersonal indignities. These
Yeah.
can be intentional or unintentional, and what they do is they communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative slights, invalidations, and insults to an individual because of their marginalized identity in our society, right?
Yes.
And you know what I said? He didn't coin it. The term microaggression was actually coined by African American Harvard University psychiatrist Chester M. Pierce way back in 1969.
Wow.
And he also defined it as these everyday, subtle, stunning, often automatic and nonverbal exchanges, which could be put downs. And he was specifically thinking about the impact on Black people by non Black offenders. Dr. Daryl Wing Sue expanded the term, thinking about all marginalized identities.
Appreciate that. Love that. Love that. Love that.
Yeah.
Let's go more, right? Because one of the other things that we hear from people is micro. There's nothing micro about it. Maybe it would be better, termed macro. So there's a little bit of difference here. So walk us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So while Dr. Sue uses the term micro, these experiences are anything but small. This is a cumulative impact of experience of these indignities, and it can have severe and long lasting effects on people's individual health and well being.
Mm.
And it also can impact the narratives that are reproduced in our own minds about ourselves and other people, as well as within society. So we got to be aware of these microaggressions and understand too, when we say micro, we don't mean that they have a small impact. What we're doing with microaggressions is we're thinking about, first of all, that they're residing in biased attitudes and behaviors of individual people. So person to person, right?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
targeted towards an individual. And the interventions of these is to change or neutralize the bigotry within an individual on an individual level. Now, we could also talk about macro aggressions. We do oftentimes in our trainings that we provide, and these reside in biased programs, policies, systems,
Yeah.
structures, practices, customs within institutions, communities, and the larger society. So these are directed towards large classes of socially marginalized groups. And the
Yes.
way to intervene on macroaggressions is by altering institutional policies that oppress and deny equal access and opportunity to marginalized groups. Again, remember, we talked about those social identities. This is all of those marginalized groups that fall within, if we think about this as a wheel of power towards the outside.
Carly, I really appreciate the distinction between individual, right, in the micro and the macro in terms of system. We talk about that all the time when we talk about racism and the systemic nature of racism, which can be different than individual racist interactions or racist comments, right? There's a difference. And so I appreciate really separating the two and also thinking about how do you intervene on an individual level and
Mm.
how you intervene on a larger systemic level. And I know today we're going to focus on the individual, on microaggressions. So we're going to drop in the chat some examples of microaggressions so that you can have for you all a document that shares some examples of microaggressions so that you all have access to that. But let's talk a little more, Carly. Let's go. You and I were talking about that like backhanded compliment,
Mhm.
like you talked about how often it's unintentional. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I want to go back to this definition that we have about microaggressions. And remember this line here, the underlying part, they can be intentional or unintentional, right? But we're going to talk now about impact or intent versus impact.
Yes, yes,
So in the document that we dropped into the chat, awesome document, has really great examples of microaggressions as well as the messages that they send. The very first one that we see up there is and this is one that we often see people get hung up on, is this question about where are you from, or where were you born, or where were you really born. So trying
mm,
to get at somebody's history or heritage by asking them this question. And what that does is it sends this message that people are aliens in their own land, right? They're
mm,
not really from, if we're talking about in the United States, they're not really from America. And it's saying that they're a perpetual foreigner and
yeah,
that their ethnicity or their race makes them exotic.
mm,
I hear all the time, and I even have felt this way before too, hey, what about being curious about people? What about when we want to know more about somebody else? We notice that maybe they have an accent, or maybe we think that they're from a different place than the United States, that they must have immigrated here. And we're curious because maybe we're from that same place, or we love to travel. And so why can't we ask people where they're really from? Well, again, this goes back to that message, right? It's telling people with this impact that there's nothing, so there's nothing wrong with the intention. The
yeah,
intention is being curious, being
yeah,
interested, but the impact is hearing on the daily, where are you really from? Hearing that over and over again conveys that message that a person is alien in their own land, that they're not American, that they don't belong, right?
yeah, yeah.
And also, we want to keep in mind when it comes to this idea of intent versus impact, that context and relationships really matter.
That part.
So let's
That
talk about,
part.
right. So our good friend that we work with, she's the new CEO of our organization, Rashi Jawade. She's
Yes.
a really good friend of ours, and Rashi immigrated to the United States from India when she was about 14 years old. So being Indian and being an immigrant are big social identities for her. It would be strange as friends if we never talked about her ethnicity and her heritage. But we want to keep in mind we have a friendship, we have an investment in one another. This is different than if I notice my Uber driver is a person of color or has an accent, right? I don't have a relationship with that person. And so this isn't to say that we should never talk to people about their background, where they're from, where their family comes from, but rather really paying attention to what is our relationship with this
Yeah.
person? What's the context that we are that we're saying it within?
I also appreciate that distinction because you're right. People sometimes will take physical features. People will take, like you said, ways of speaking, accents or not, and ask like, okay, and your thought at the time is, am I in relationship with this person? Do I owe this? Or because it feels like you're being interrogated almost. It feels, to your point, like you're having to prove your belongingness to this place. So I think you're right. So it's super important to think about the intent versus impact. So we ask, what's the strategy for it? What is the strategy? So now, Carly, because we work together, and many people on here might often know this. For me, in addition to thinking about, in addition to defining things and thinking about how things work in theory, in addition to seeing what's on the paper, like here are some of the things that people say. I like to share experiences that I have had,
Mhm.
and so I'd like to share, right, an experience that I have had in terms of racial microaggressions, just serving in my role as a former principal. And as you might guess, one of the main things that I was responsible for was hiring folks. And through that process, of course, there was an interview process. And almost almost without fail over the years, when there is a candidate of color, some of the panelists that were serving on my interview panel with me commented only on the candidates of color and how articulate they were. I
Mhm.
didn't get that comment for white candidates, but almost always it was almost like your turn, you say it, right? Not that there was a plan, but it came up often. And so as I had to peel back the layers of that and really naming that as a microaggression, even though the candidate wasn't in the room, that was a microaggression on me
Mhm.
as I experienced it because I too had the same social identity as some of the candidates, right? And so the message, quite frankly, Carly, that is sent to me was that, hmm, if their language and their speaking sounds more white, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, is what we're looking for. And that not only are we looking for that in a candidate, that this is exceptional or remarkable that it was coming from a person of color.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the ones that actually, quite frankly, in my role, leadership role that I've experienced. What about you? What have you experienced?
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, Doc. And I think too, like what that shows us is that even when our intentions are good, right? People are trying to give a compliment to these candidates. If we're only paying attention to those good intentions, we might be dismissing or ignoring the impact of our words. And the impact, just like you said, right, is that it's a surprise that a candidate of color is articulate, right? That it's something that's notable that needs to be commented on only for those candidates of color. For me, one that always comes to my mind is so one day my dad and he was in construction for years and does a lot of woodworking projects at home. And he and I were going to build a workbench for him for down in the basement.
Mm.
I was gonna he was including me on this little project so that we could have some fun together. And we had to go to the hardware store. We went up to Lowe's, and as we were pulling in, he's like, "This is my favorite place in the world. I just love going here."
Mm.
That's funny because I really dislike going to a hardware store. And the reason I dislike it is because I have experienced gendered microaggressions in
Yes.
spaces like these, where if I am asking a question or people see me, even though I know where I'm going, right? I'm the daughter of a construction worker, the daughter of somebody who's been taught how to use tools and things like that, that
Yeah.
people still think that I don't know what I'm doing or
Mm.
don't know where to go in the store to or don't know how to use the things that are in there, right? So
Right.
we kind of talked about that, and we're like, oh, well, that's funny, and walked into the store, and my dad wanted to ask where particular lumber was. I think he was looking for 2x4s or something. And so we went up to ask the guy, and a man who was working there, and the guy turns to me and goes, "Oh, I bet you're a real big help." And I was like, "Dad, there's the example, exactly what I just said, right? This sort of devaluation, like Regina's saying in the chat, this assumption around um, around gendered lines, saying that people who are assigned female at birth don't know how to be helpful, don't know how to use construction equipment, don't know how to use tools." And it was interesting that it happened. So I got to show my dad in that moment,
In
hey,
that moment.
exactly what I'm talking about. This microaggression is something that I experience all the time here. And he was like, I would have never, ever
Mm.
thought about that until I saw this happen to you.
Yeah, I think we also talk about that in our work with folks. When you are in a social identity, right, that is closer to power,
Mm.
sometimes you don't see it, right? Because you're not experiencing that. That's where you don't even think about it, right? You're like, "Oh, that's right. I am closer to power here." So sometimes I don't even think about it. Yeah, thank you. Tay offered the same thing that has happened when parallel parking as a woman. Absolutely. Like we get these little digs. Yeah, yes, yes. And I love what Misha's saying. I just want to bring some of the voices of our viewing audience in. Um, Misha's telling us is that people who have internalized these microaggressions over a lifetime, might have responses to them that are subconscious and not even realize how deep that's in there, right? It took to your comment. It took me a minute to know actually how to address when I was hearing within that interview process those backhanded compliments, right? And wondering and thinking and knowing when to address them. So that's a perfect shift, right? Now that you all have that paper and it tells you some example of microaggressions, the message that it sends, and the group that often gets them, let's talk about just that. Let's talk about how to interrupt them, how we can address them, and most importantly, let's talk about how to shut them down, right? So let's delve a little bit deeper into this word that is not as well known as the word micro and macro aggressions. This word is micro interventions. Okay. So, what are those? I don't know if you've heard. Let me know if you've heard of that in the chat. Yep, heard of it. New to me. Let us know. Talk to us, y'all. Micro interventions are anti bias actions. Remember, real talk, real action, right? Actions used by targets, parents, significant others, allies, co conspirators, and well intentioned bystanders to both counteract, to challenge, to diminish, or even neutralize the individual microaggressions, and those institutional and societal macro aggressions, expressions of prejudice, bigotry, and discriminations. These are everyday actions that responsible individuals can take in their everyday lives to combat bias and bigotry expressed through both micro and macro aggressions. Yeah, I'm checking out the chat over here. New, new, new. This term is new to a lot of folks, y'all. New to a lot of folks. Okay. So we're going to break down, we're going to break it down even further. We're going to break micro interventions down to three categories. Micro affirmations, those are just small acts that validate and affirm others. Then we move on. Next, micro protections. That's ongoing work, and it supports supporting ourselves in really developing positive racial ethnic identities as well as systemic understanding of racism. Okay? And then finally, and sometimes for some folks, the most difficult ones, but I promise you, once you start, it'll get easier and easier, right? Micro challenges, and that is taking action against microaggression and not only leaving it there, oppression as a whole. What does that look like? And so, some examples of micro interventions that are just everyday, quick examples: interrupt the telling of a racist joke. Interrupt that. Don't just cringe. That made me cringe, and uh, interrupt it. Disagree with an expression of a stereotype. When someone says all or they, and really begin to generalize and lump folks in a group based upon that social identity, disagree with that. Also, really, really important, use of people's self identified names and pronouns. Carly started and expressed she, they, right? And one of the ways that I can affirm her and them is to say her, she, them, and often use they and them, right? Because she, her might to some people feel obvious visually. And in order to say, I see you, Carly, right? At the top of this, I said, I'm working here with Carly. I'm going to, after I introduce myself, they will introduce themselves, right? Just that small thing, right? To affirm Carly in their identity. Okay. Also, and we're going to ask you all, what are some microinventions that you've utilized? We'll ask that in a minute. But you can also support the perspective of a person of color or a person of the global majority. So many times when we're doing this work and we're talking to allies and our co-conspirators, one of the things we say is, believe us when we're telling you something, or uplift. That's a great idea. You know, I hadn't thought of that. Bring them into the room in a general. It doesn't have time, but sometimes a person of color is in a room and they put out an idea and it's kind of glossed over. And when I find my colleagues and my co-conspirators like Carly saying, wait a minute, Doc offered something here that I'd like to go deeper into, boy, do I feel affirmed. Boy, do I feel even almost protected, right? If I would even go in that middle lane. And also, I'm feeling like that's a challenge to the status quo. So, really appreciative when that happens for me. I feel like that's a gift for me and to me. And pointing out discriminatory behaviors. When you see it, when you feel it, name it. Also, continue to educate yourself about microaggressions. What are these? Like I said, we gave you all, and certainly not an exhaustive list, of microaggressions, right? But definitely lean on that list. Carly, what come on, join me here. What comes to mind for you here?
Yeah, so that piece, I want to double down on that piece that you just said, Dr. Evans, about in about educating yourself about microaggressions.
Mm,
One of the most proactive, best things that we can do to interrupt microaggressions is to learn about them, right? To take
yeah,
sheets like the one we dropped in the chat, and maybe our pal Natani can drop it in once more, that Google document that has the microaggressions and the messages that they send. What's powerful about that is to get ahead of it, right? To,
yeah.
to look at this list and say, ooh, that's one that I've said before. Oh my gosh, I see myself in this list. And to dismantle it on our own too. That, I think, we talk a lot about interrupting them once they've happened, but doing that pre-work for ourselves, building our critical consciousness and racial literacy to understand what a microaggression sounds like, looks
Mm.
like, and the message it sends is so important.
That's key. It's critical, right? Because it's ever evolving, like what you're experiencing. But thank you so much, Carly, for bringing that in. Um, Jessica, you have a good question. Like, how do you challenge this? And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Yes, we're going to challenge. We're going to talk about that now, and we're
Yeah.
going to talk about it like through our examples. One of the way, right? So, um, first, let's revisit the microaggression stories that Carly and I talked about. And those were verbal, right? And then we can add on to this. So go back to my story. And I want you all to really drop in the chat for what if you were on that panel when a Black candidate is being called articulate? What micro intervention might you use? Drop it in the chat. Drop it in the chat. Let's talk about it. Drop it in the chat. What might you use? And I'm looking to the side. I'm keeping my eye on the chat because I wanna hear from you all as well. What might you have you been there? I'm sure some folks have been there too. Yeah. Yeah. What would you do? And we're not looking for perfection here, y'all. Not looking to support. Here's where we can sort of crowdsource. Like, how do we handle these? Yeah.
Mm.
Hey, I love that. For the straw interventions, and that is approaching a situation with curiosity. I wonder what makes articulate than the other candidates. Come on, Tay. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Dr. You were breaking up just a little bit, so I'll lift that up again.
Yes.
The tape. I hope we're pronouncing that. If we're not, let us know in the chat.
Yes, please.
But asking the question, I wonder what makes this candidate more articulate than the other candidates, right? Kind
Yes.
of helping people raise their awareness about the microaggression that is being perpetuated. What
Yeah.
else? What are some other ways of interrupting that microaggression? What are some other interventions, micro
Yes.
intervention?
Yes. All right. Ah, Regina saying, listen, at this age and stage, I'm going to name it as it is, right? Here's the thing. You're on a panel of people you know and that you're working with, right? This is not a panel of folks you don't know. And so, yeah, like name it, and Regina's like, I don't have the energy to talk around it. Like, let's hit it head on. Yes, yes. I love that. Love that. Love that.
Yeah, and Jade says, have you not met any other articulate Black people? That's such a great question to sort of flip that on its head to say, like, what's wrong with you that you haven't, that this is such a surprise for you, right?
Yes.
It's a way to build that consciousness in the moment and micro confront what's happening, micro challenge what's happening in that room.
That's a challenge. And what we want to say is you can challenge. That's one category of micro interventions. Don't feel like you can't, you know? Yeah. Oh, I love that, Misha. Did you expect anything different? Right. Really just coming forward saying, what were you expecting?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that.
All right, let's think about this is so cool to have your example with crowdsourcing some responses and micro
Yes.
interventions for it. I want to hear about my example.
Yes.
So if you were in the situation at the hardware store, if say for example you were my dad and you heard this microaggression from this man who worked at the store saying, I bet she's a real big help. What would you say? What would be your micro intervention? How would you interrupt that microaggression? Drop it in the chat.
Yes. I
And
can't
after you
wait.
do, then I'll tell you what my dad actually said.
Oh, yes. I want to know. I want to know.
Yeah, what would you say if you were in that situation and somebody was being experiencing a gendered microaggression?
Mm.
Ah, I love that. Actually, I'm here assisting them. That's great. That's a really good one. Oh, that's very presumptuous of you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else? Anything else? More help than you could ever be. I love that one,
I
Sammy.
love it.
Well, and what my dad actually did say was, why wouldn't she be? And so it was sort of a helpful moment where he sort of flipped that again on its head to say, yeah, she is a big help. Why wouldn't she be a help for this
Right.
project?
Right.
So, thinking about also, we were saying one of the best ways for us to interrupt microaggressions inside of us, right? To do that proactive work. Also, if we learn more about what microaggressions sound like, then we can be there to stand up as micro interveners. I'm
Yes.
proud of everything he knows. I love that. I'll have
I
to
love it.
love it. Yeah. So then we can stand up as co-conspirators, just like Dr. Evans said, and speak up, do these micro challenges in the moment for our people and for our people that are both share similar identities as we do, but also, and this is where the co-conspirator part comes in, those of us who have dominant identities learning about what it sounds like to have microaggressions happen to people with marginalized identities, and again using our privilege in that moment to stand up for what's right.
Right. Thanks y'all for that. Now let's do some Q&A. We had a question earlier from Jessica that asked us, yep, how do you challenge it when someone's microaggressions are less verbal and more behavioral, right? That's a great question. And if there are more questions around this topic, will you please drop them so that we can address those? I know for me, one of, the less verbal ones that I have experienced, even as a young mom with children with me, right? I've been in a situation where I'm in a place, in a space, and very obvious, that a person who was white, like grab their purse, like pull their purse in as if I, am a threat, or am going to, my thoughts and ideas are to steal their purse. And again, several times that happened with my children with me. I'm like, would I really do that with my children? I'm thinking in my head. And so honestly, in that situation, I'm not actually greatly advocating this, but in that situation, we were in an elevator, it was really small, and I mirrored their I mirrored their behavior, and they were like shocked that, because I wasn't in relationship with them. I had made a decision that I wasn't going to get into a conversation. We were on the elevator. Somebody was about to get off, right? So it was a situation where I didn't really know the person, and I really didn't. And I thought I'm going to mirror. Now, I'm not advocating to do microaggressions to other people. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not, well, microaggress them right back. No, that is not what I am saying. I'm just giving an example of, for me, one of the quick things that I did, which was behavioral with a person that I'm not in relationship with. But Carly, join in with me. Let's give the folks some more productive ways.
Yeah. Well, thinking about
Real. I'm just being real with y'all. Like that's just what how it hit me at the moment, you know.
absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
and it's an example, right, of the microaggression having this big impact, right?
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
micro in the impact that it has.
Yes.
Well, this makes me wonder, Jessica, thinking about, I think about coming to this question through the lens of having a dominant identity, being a white person.
Yeah.
And it immediately makes me think of how to bring other people into the conversation. So, for example, if I was on that elevator with my aunt, for example, and I noticed that she sort of clutched up her handbag when somebody of color got onto the elevator. What I would do is to say afterwards, like, "Hey, did you notice
Yeah.
that?" That you may not have even noticed that your body did this thing, right? It might have been so unconscious, but when you do that, here's the message that it sends to that
Yes.
person. I also, I think about this a lot. We were doing once a workshop where we were talking about microaggressions, and there was a woman of color there. She was a black woman, and she said, I love walking on my bike path that is in my neighborhood, but when I do that, the white people always look away. They look down at the ground, they don't smile, they look away. And over, every time this happens, I feel like less enthusiastic about being on this bike trail, like I don't
Yeah.
belong. And it broke my heart as somebody who loves riding my bike on bike trails and being
Yeah.
out in nature. And so I took that as sort of a charge to say, you know what, like I could be a person who smiles at everybody when I'm on. First of all, I
Yes.
examined myself and was like, am I doing that behavior too? Am I not
Yes.
acknowledging people of color when I'm on my bike passing by them? And then I thought, you know what would I want to see in the world? What would make me feel like I belong? And it would be a smile at people as I'm passing them and going by. And so I started doing that for every passerby, white and folks of color, just
Yes.
to try to create a more inclusive community on the bike paths. And then also too, I when I've ridden bikes with folks, I've told them this story, and I said, hey, this one story kind of broke my heart, and try to sort of get a coalition of other smilers on the
Yes.
path too, so that we can disrupt that particular behavioral microaggression that some people are feeling and experiencing.
And I think, Carly, that just circles back around to one of the key critical action steps. Get familiar with the microaggression so that you can call it out in yourself first, right? We're not asking you to be the microaggression police, right? But that you can call it out in yourself first. And guess what? We all do them, right? You don't, I want to be super clear about this. Not only white folks do them,
Yep.
no, people of color do them as well, especially sometimes those genderized, ones. I've heard, other women talking about, well, we can't drive, we can't, or no, I like those things. And I say, when we agree on things like that, you know, it continues the belief, it continues the microaggressions that other people might do and say when we have that, internalized agreement, that internalized oppression is what we call it, when we begin to agree and believe, and not only agree and believe, but kind of spread and perpetuate those things. And so I think, and then once you find out, like, okay, here's what it is, to Carly's point, here's how it shows up, what can I do to disrupt? And not only in that particular situation, Carly said, okay, I'm doing this. And guess what? I see some other folks who are in this group of bikers. Who can I ask to join me in doing this general disruption? So that's a great idea. Is like, make it priority for yourself and look for your people. Who is it that I can have join me in interrupting this particular um, microaggression? And I think, you know, you talked about, Carly, you often talk about practice. What do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, that's so practicing this does make it a little bit easier, but I just want to name too that interrupting microaggressions never just gets super easy, right? Like it's never like, oh, no big deal, water off my back. Like it's no, it's easy peasy to do. And so I want to name that really by practicing micro interventions, what we're doing is we're getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. So
Mm,
saying, like I notice, for example, when I'm about to, if I hear something racialized going on and I know I need to interrupt a microaggression, my heart will start pounding. I get a little tingle in my bottom lip. My
mm,
armpit sometimes starts sweating depending on like how high stakes it feels.
yes.
And that's an indication to my body saying, oh, like you're anxious right now. And that used to override me. That
Mm,
used to happen, and I would feel so nervous, and I'd be like, you know what, I don't know what to say right now. I'm not going to do anything.
yeah.
But the more practice I've done, and the more used I've to my body's response in that moment, the easier it is to be like, okay, body, you're doing your thing. You're trying to protect me, but you're not going to stop me from
Mm,
interrupting this microaggression. I can
okay.
even think of an example not that long ago, a few years ago, when we had our virtual conference, and everybody was at a session having a good time. I think it was a one of our closing sessions, so people were reflecting on how much they enjoyed the conference, and somebody in the chat said, like, I love this space so much, I found my tribe. And it was a white
Mm,
woman who had said it, and I remember
mm,
seeing that and my heart started pounding, thinking, oh, everybody, the over 100 people are in this space, and they're all looking at that. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I should interrupt it because I'm seeing it, so I shouldn't
yeah.
wait for somebody else to have to interrupt it. And I
Yes.
got nervous too, because we had indigenous folks as participants, but also indigenous folks as presenters in this space
Yeah.
that could be harmed by this statement. And
Yes.
so I remember distinctly feeling nervous, even though I was in my role as an embracing equity employee,
Yeah.
and still feeling nervous to interrupt, and still then getting into the chat saying, and affirming like, hey, we're so glad that you're here, and also using the word tribe from non-indigenous people can be
Yes.
considered a microaggression. And that
Yes.
was it, right? Like I was able to do my response. I got over my body's reaction trying to shut me down, and interrupted it. But I say that example not to pat myself on the back, but rather to say, like, no matter how much we practice, we can still be sort of nervous about doing it.
Mm,
And that's
mm-hmm.
if you are.
Yes.
And that's why we talk about things like wholeness, getting integrated with our body, doing some somatic work to calm it down when it's feeling activated, so that it doesn't derail us from showing up as a co-conspirator, or showing up and standing up for ourselves or others around us.
Yeah. To your point, Carly, I think for me, I think people automatically assume that because we do this work, that it's super easy for us to do micro interventions and to interrupt and to disrupt. And it's actually not. And one of the reasons, I'm just going to say for me, that it's not is, depending on who it is, I'm afraid that I'm going to damage the relationship.
Mm.
I'm afraid to disrupt or interrupt because I'm thinking, boy, they're going to be ticked off. They're never going to speak to me again. And then I had to flip that thinking on its head, because if I truly love, care about somebody, and am in relationship with them, I don't want them showing up making those kind of mistakes. So most people have said, wow, in some way, maybe not using these words exactly, that's a gift for me, for you to call me in. We talk about it all the time. Call somebody in. That's, we talked about when you're asking questions and when you're supporting people. Call folks in and people will appreciate it. People will be mortified, like, oh my goodness, I've been out here committing all these microaggressions and my friends have been nearby and have not said a word. Like, they're more mortified sometimes about that than the fact that they have done that. So yeah, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared,
Mhm.
do it. definitely do it. The I don't know if that makes you think of something. It seems like you're about to say something, Carly.
Well, I was just going to ask you, Dr. Evans, so I've sort of talked about it from like the co-conspirator
Yeah.
angle as a white person stepping in. And I wonder if there's any other advice you might have for us co-conspirators when it comes to listening to our friends about who experience microaggressions or standing up for them through microinterventions.
Yeah, I think, the main thing, believe people with
Mm,
marginalized identities when they say they're experiencing a microaggression. One of the most frustrating things is first of all, this is what I want everybody to know. Let me lean in and say this to you. I have asked myself 10 questions in my head. Did that really happen? Was that a microaggression? Am I overthinking it? I'm already grappling with it internally,
mm,
right? So then I take that next step to talk to somebody who I believe is my ally or my co-conspirator, and I tell you, and you say, really? Do you think that's what they really meant? And part of that is so demoralizing. It
mm,
is so defeating to know that someone that you think, believe, feel is your ally, your co-conspirator who's in the trenches with you, is then asking you to prove that harm has been done to you. So really, really lean in, listen, and then collaborate. How would you like? This is a question that I'm really asking a lot of people. How would you like for me to show up in this moment for you?
mm,
Right? Because sometimes people don't want you maybe just jumping in. It's like, I just needed a place to vent. Sometimes it's just, I need to ask, how would you like me to show up for you?
mm,
Shall we brainstorm a micro intervention? Is it something that you want a micro intervention that you want to apply? Or would you like for me to be your co-conspirator and I can apply the micro intervention, right? Collaborate. Do you just need some time to heal from it?
mm,
Because I'm telling y'all, it is death by 1,000 cuts. It hurts a lot. And this is coming from a person who has a lot of marginalized identities. And even if you have just one,
mm,
even if you
mhm,
have just one marginalized identity, it hurts. So believe folks, when they tell you. I
mm,
think that's huge when I think about, and thanks for asking, publicly asking, what do you need from me? That's what I heard you asking, Carly, and you do often anyway. But I heard you asking, what is it that we need to do?
mm. And just to add to that, Dak, and thank you so much for sharing, because that was, that message, believe us, believe me. That's such an important message for us to hear with dominant identities and in this conversation, right, as a white person.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too is right. Sometimes that paternalism makes us think, well, I know how to solve this problem for this other person
Mm,
without including them in the solution, right? Or asking them what they really want or need. And so, a way I think to balance both, not taking charge and thinking you know best, but also not doing anything at all and putting
yes.
the burden on the person who's experienced the microaggression to have to come up with the solution is to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking could work,
Yes.
right? If this
Yes.
happens in a meeting, I could speak up and say XYZ. How does that sound? Would that be helpful? Or do you have something else in mind, right?
Come
So that way
on.
we're doing some of the cognitive labor instead
Yes.
of requiring the person who is experiencing the microaggression to have to then solve how to intervene on it too.
That is so important. That's why I want you to catch how I phrased that question. How would you like for me to show up for you? Would you like me to
Mm,
come up with a micro intervention? Would you like us to collaborate, right? You're simply asking what you need. And then, to Carly's point, give a few suggestions so that they can, would you just like me to listen, and just to give you the gift of what we call and what I call radical listening, so that you have a space? Would you just like me to hold a space for you in this moment? Would you like to circle back around in a couple of days? Like, how would you like me to show up? So what you're saying is, I'm here, I'm a co-conspirator, and tell me how you want me to show up, and then I'm going to give you some suggestions. So I love that, Carly, because oftentimes it is on the shoulder of those who have been harmed to like, well, how do you think we should fix it? Like, I don't know. I don't know right now. Like, what you got over there? You know what? How can you help me? Like, truly co-power with me. So wow, this has been great, y'all. Thank you for joining Carly and I in this conversation. And don't forget, it's always real talk, real action. So we've got some calls to action. We're going to drop them in the chat. Our call to action is stay engaged with the Embracing Equity community. Stay with us, y'all. Keep coming to the free webinars. We're recruiting right now for our leadership residency, which Carly and I are both really critical in. So we're recruiting. Send a team of 3 so that you can talk about microaggressions and much more as you're building an equitable organization. And if you're not sure, like I like Embracing Equity, I wonder if they can help us. We have a free consultation. Sign up to get a free consultation, and we can talk with you about what that looks like. And most importantly, guess what, y'all? I offer a free 30-minute coaching session. I will coach you on any problem of practice that you have going on, and then hopefully we can continue to work together. So thanks, everybody. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for participating in the chat. Thank you for asking really good questions. And just know, real talk, real action, and we will definitely see you next month.
Yes, see you next month. Thank you all so much. Thanks, Doc, for the conversation.
Thanks. Same. Bye, y'all. Bye.
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 Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for showing up, y'all. Yeah, y'all brought it. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Talk to you later.